Butch Reed was one of the most physically gifted performers of his entire generation. He had the size, the speed, the agility, and the natural charisma that promoters spend their whole careers searching for. Dave Meltzer once described him as having a combination of speed, power, and agility that very few men in the history of the business ever possessed. He main evented the very first Survivor Series. He held tag team gold for the better part of a year and set a record that stood until the company that crowned him no longer existed. He drew money in 3 different decades across nearly every major promotion in America. And yet, when wrestling fans rank the great powerhouses of his era, his name often gets left out of the conversation. He is the guy who was almost a megastar. The guy who was one decision, one booking, one break away from the very top. And the story of how that happened, of how a small-town football player from Missouri became one of the most respected and most overlooked tough men in wrestling history, is a story worth telling in full. This is the life and career of Butch Reed, the Natural, the Hacksaw, one half of Doom, a man who could have been the biggest star in the world and instead became something arguably more interesting, a legend's legend. Let's get into it. He was born Bruce Franklin Reed on July 11, 1954, and he grew up in Warrensburg, Missouri, a quiet college town tucked into the western part of the state. From an early age, it was obvious that Bruce was different. He was bigger than the other kids, stronger than the other kids, and more naturally athletic than almost anyone his age. Sports came easy to him in a way that frustrated his competitors and delighted his coaches. American football was where he truly shone. At Warrensburg High School, where he graduated in the early 1970s, Reed was a standout on the gridiron. He was the kind of player who got noticed, the kind of player whose name traveled beyond the county lines. There were reports of interest from major Big Ten programs sniffing around the powerful young lineman. But the recruiting picture was complicated by academics, and the bigger schools backed off. So Reed stayed close to home. He enrolled at what was then Central Missouri State, the university in his own hometown, now known as the University of Central Missouri. There he anchored the defense, lining up in the trenches where football games are really won and lost. He was described in the local press of the era as the man who returned to anchor the defensive front, a position of leadership and brute necessity. He was tough, he was relentless, and he was good enough to make professional scouts take notice. In 1975, Reed went undrafted by the National Football League. That sounds like a setback, and in some ways it was, but plenty of good players slip through the draft and catch on as free agents. That is exactly what happened. In May of 1976, the Kansas City Chiefs, his hometown professional team, signed him to a contract. For a kid from Warrensburg, this was the dream, playing in the National Football League for the very team he had grown up watching. But the dream was short-lived. By late July of 1976, before the regular season even began, the Chiefs released him. The exact reasons have been muddied over the decades, with various accounts pointing to nagging ankle and knee problems that limited what he could do on the field. Whatever the precise cause, the result was the same. Butch Reed's professional football career was over almost before it started, and he never appeared in a regular season National Football League game. Now, here is where a lot of stories get tangled up. For years, Reed's National Football League background got inflated and exaggerated. The fact that he was cut in training camp got conveniently softened over time into the impression of an established pro career. The truth is more modest. He was a talented college player who earned a tryout with the Chiefs and did not make the final roster. But that football foundation, that genuine athletic pedigree, would become the bedrock of everything that came next. Because professional wrestling was about to give Bruce Reed the platform that football never did. In 1978, Reed turned to the squared circle. He was trained by Ronnie Etchison, a respected veteran of the Central States Territory, and he began learning his new trade in the Kansas City area. Working for the legendary promoter Bob Geigel, he wrestled under his real name in those early days, just Bruce Reed. a green but enormously promising rookie trying to figure out how to translate his football toughness into the very different language of professional wrestling. He learned fast. The territory system of the era was the perfect proving ground, a grueling circuit of nightly matches in high school gymnasiums and armories and civic centers where a young wrestler either got good in a hurry or washed out entirely. Reed got good. By late 1980, he had his first significant championship, capturing the NWA Central States Tag Team title alongside a partner named Jerry Roberts. They held the belts into the new year before dropping them in January of 1981. It was a small title in a regional promotion, but it was a start. It meant the bookers trusted him. It meant he could be trusted to carry gold. From the Central States, Reed expanded his horizons. He landed in championship wrestling from Florida, the storied territory run by Eddie Graham, one of the most respected booking minds in the entire industry. There, Reed teamed with a wrestler called Sweet Brown Sugar, and together the pair pulled off a genuinely impressive feat. They defeated the team of Dory Funk Jr. and David Von Erich, two members of two of the most famous families in all of wrestling, to capture the Florida version of the North American Tag Team title. Beating names like Funk and Von Erich was the kind of thing that announced a young wrestler had arrived. Reed was no longer just a prospect, he was a player. But it was in one specific territory that Butch Reed would truly become a star, and that territory was Mid-South Wrestling. Mid-South, run by the legendary cowboy Bill Watts, was unlike any other promotion in America. Watts ran a rough, physical, hard-hitting style that prized athleticism and believability above all else. He wanted his wrestlers to look like they could actually fight, because in Watts's world, the line between worked and real was kept deliberately thin. A muscled-up former football player with legitimate toughness and natural charisma was exactly the kind of performer Watts loved. Reed was a perfect fit. He had taken a few bookings in Mid-South as far back as 1980, but he was a virtual unknown then. When he returned for real in early 1983, everything was different. Now he was a seasoned circuit star, and Watts had real plans for him. Reed was brought in as a powerful new ally for the biggest star in the entire promotion, the Junkyard Dog. The Junkyard Dog was a phenomenon in Mid-South, one of the most beloved performers the territory ever produced. A charismatic crowd favorite who sold out buildings across the South. Pairing Reed with the Dog put him instantly in the main event picture. Together they went to war against a villainous faction known as the Rat Pack, a trio that featured the $1 Million Man, Matt Bourne, and a brash newcomer named Jim Duggan. And it was Duggan who provided Reed with one of the more memorable wrinkles of his career. You see, by this point, Reed had started calling himself Hacksaw Butch Reed. The problem was that Jim Duggan had also adopted the very same nickname, billing himself as Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Two men, one nickname, and a wrestling territory that loved a simple, personal grudge. The feud practically wrote itself. Who was the real Hacksaw? The two big, tough, hard-nosed brawlers collided over nothing more than a name, and the crowds ate it up. But the real turning point, the moment that defined Reed as a top-level attraction, came that summer. Duggan eventually split from Ted and the Rat Pack, drifting toward the side of the fan favorites. And when the Junkyard Dog had to choose between his old ally Reed and the increasingly popular Duggan, the Dog chose Duggan. Reed did not take it well. What followed was one of the great heel turns of the territory era. Reed turned on the Junkyard Dog in vicious fashion, savagely attacking the man who had been his partner and marking him with a streak of yellow paint down his back to brand him a coward. It was a brutal, personal, unforgettable betrayal, and it transformed Reed from a supporting player into one of the most hated men in the South. Butch Reed was now looking out for one person and one person only: Butch Reed. The heel turn paid off immediately. On July 16, 1983, Reed defeated the Junkyard Dog to capture the Mid-South North American Heavyweight Championship, the top singles prize in the territory. and the feud that followed, Reed versus the Junkyard Dog, became one of the most important rivalries of his entire life. Reed would later reflect that the two of them proved something significant to the industry, that a feud built around two African-American main eventers could draw serious money at the box office, in an era when promoters too often assumed that was impossible. They sold out buildings, they headlined cards, and they did it on the strength of two genuinely talented performers who happened to share the same skin color in a business that did not always know what to do with that. Reed's Mid-South run was loaded with memorable chapters. He carried the North American title with arrogance and authority. He clashed with the monstrous Kamala. That feud did not go his way. The enormous Ugandan giant proved too much for him and beat him around the territory before Reed quietly moved on. He found himself courted by the villainous manager Skandor Akbar, who tried to recruit the meanest heel in Mid-South into his stable by offering Reed an expensive Rolex watch as a signing bonus. In a genuine surprise, Reed turned the gift down flat and ended up feuding with Akbar's entire group. That set up a memorable angle where Hacksaw Jim Duggan came charging to Reed's rescue with a 2x4. The two old rivals briefly united against a common enemy. He also added more tag team gold to his resume. Reed paired with Jim the Anvil, the powerhouse who would later find fame in the World Wrestling Federation as one half of the Hart Foundation. The two big men defeated Dugan and the rising star Magnum TA to capture the Mid-South Tag Team titles. There was even a brief detour to the NWA's Mid-Atlantic region in 1985, where Reed worked as a bodyguard for the flamboyant Jimmy Garvin. That stint was short-lived. Reed, ever true to character, soon decided he was better off looking out for himself, and he returned to Mid-South, where he beat the veteran Dick Murdoch for the North American title once again, before later dropping it to Dirty Dick Slater. By the mid-1980s, Butch Reed had done just about everything a wrestler could do in the territory system. He had been a top face and a top heel. He had held singles gold and tag gold. He had drawn money against the biggest star in the South. He had a look, a presence, and a body of work that made him one of the most attractive free agents in the entire industry. And in 1986, the biggest fish in the pond came calling. Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation was in the middle of its explosive national expansion, gobbling up the best talent from the dying territories and turning wrestling into a coast-to-coast cultural phenomenon. McMahon wanted Reed, but there was a wrinkle. Reed came as part of a package deal, paired with a smooth-talking manager named Slick, the self-proclaimed Doctor of Style. Reed and Slick signed together, and the World Wrestling Federation brought them in as a duo. There was just one problem. McMahon already had a hacksaw. Jim Duggan had beaten Reed to the World Wrestling Federation, and the company was building Duggan into a patriotic fan favorite under the very same nickname the two men had once feuded over in Mid-South. So Reed needed a new identity, and the one the World Wrestling Federation gave him was, to put it kindly, unusual. They dyed his hair a bright bleached blonde and rechristened him The Natural. The name was a wink and a nod, a little inside joke, because of course there was nothing natural about that dyed blonde hair sitting atop a black wrestler. The gimmick was loosely modeled on an earlier performer named Sweet Daddy Siki, a flamboyant, bleach-blonde character from a previous generation. Reed came to the ring with Slick at his side and a theme song that, charitably, has not aged especially well. But the package was undeniable. The physique was incredible. The athleticism was real. On paper, the natural Butch Reed looked like a future world champion. His pay-per-view debut came at WrestleMania 3 in 1987, the grandest stage the company had, in front of a famously enormous crowd in the Pontiac Silverdome. Reed defeated the colorful, high-energy Coco Beware in a solid showcase match. It was a strong start, and almost immediately, the World Wrestling Federation pointed him toward the Intercontinental title, the secondary championship that often served as a launching pad to the very top. Here we arrive at one of the most debated chapters of Reed's entire career, and it is worth slowing down to get it right. After WrestleMania 3, the Intercontinental title was held by Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, one of the finest in-ring performers of all time. Steamboat had won the belt from Randy Savage in their legendary WrestleMania 3 Classic, and Reed was immediately positioned as his next challenger, feuding with the Dragon at house shows and on television. The persistent legend, repeated for decades, is that Reed was scheduled to defeat Steamboat for the Intercontinental title at a set of television tapings, but that he no-showed the event. As the story goes, an irritated McMahon scrapped the plan and instead put the title on the Honky Tonk Man, who went on to one of the longest and most famous Intercontinental title reigns in history. It is a great story. It is also, according to Reed himself, not true. In later interviews, Reed denied ever showing those tapings, and skeptics point out that when Honky Tonk Man won the belt that June, Reed was actually shown on television celebrating in the locker room with the other heels. Muddying the water further, Slick, Reed's own manager, offered a different and less flattering account years later. In a podcast interview, Slick claimed Reed was indeed supposed to win the Intercontinental title, and that the plan fell apart not because of Vince, but because of Reed himself, suggesting that Reed could be unreliable and unprofessional, the kind of guy who would not arrange his own transportation to a town and would simply sit in the lobby waiting for someone to offer him a ride. According to Slick, the office gradually soured on him. The honest truth is that we cannot fully reconcile these accounts. What we can say is that Butch Reed was clearly being groomed for a major run with that championship, and for reasons that remain disputed to this day, it never happened. It is one of the great what-if moments of the era. The rest of Reed's World Wrestling Federation tenure unfolded in the shadow of that missed opportunity. The company tried to build a feud between him and a returning superstar Billy Graham, the former world champion attempting a comeback after hip surgery. But Graham's body simply could not handle it anymore, so the World Wrestling Federation used Reed and Slick's newest monster acquisition, the One-Man Gang, to storyline injure Graham and write him out, which conveniently explained Graham's real-life retirement. Graham then took on a protege of his own, Don Muraco, who stepped into the feud with Reed. That rivalry led to Reed's most prestigious moment in the company. At the very first Survivor Series, in November of 1987, Reed was part of the star-studded main event, a 5-on-5 elimination tag team match. He stood on the team led by Andre the Giant, opposite the team led by Hulk Hogan himself. It was the main event of a brand new pay-per-view concept, in front of a national audience, alongside some of the biggest names in the world. Unfortunately, the booking did Reed no favors. He was the very first man eliminated from the entire match, pinned by Hogan early on. It became something of a pattern. When the World Wrestling Federation launched the first ever Royal Rumble in January of 1988, Reed was again the very first competitor eliminated from the match. And at WrestleMania 4 that spring, in the tournament to crown a new World Wrestling Federation champion, Reed drew Randy Savage in the opening round. He actually dominated much of the contest, but in classic heel fashion, he wasted too much time taunting Savage's manager Miss Elizabeth from the top rope, allowing the Macho Man to recover and eliminate him. Savage, of course, went on to win the entire tournament and the championship. That loss to Savage was essentially the end of the line for the natural in the World Wrestling Federation. Shortly after WrestleMania 4, Reed and the company parted ways. Notably, Slick stayed behind to manage other talent, while Reed struck out on his own once again. He had the look. He had the ability, but he had been booked as a mid-card talent whose main job was to make the bigger stars look good, and the megastar run his physical gifts seemed to promise had simply never materialized in the World Wrestling Federation. So Reed went home, in a sense. He resurfaced in Jim Crockett Promotions, the Southern powerhouse that would soon be rebranded as World Championship Wrestling. And the first thing he did was reclaim his identity. He was Hacksaw Butch Reed again, free of the bleach blonde gimmick, Butch, and he wasted no time reigniting the rivalry that had made him a star. The Junkyard Dog had also landed in the promotion, and the two old foes picked up right where they had left off in Mid-South. But lightning did not strike twice. The magic of their earlier feud proved difficult to recapture in a new place and a new era, and the rivalry came and went without the fireworks of old. Reed bounced around the WCW undercard for a stretch, managed at one point by the cunning James J. Dillon, before his contract was storyline sold to a sinister manager figure. He was a solid hand, a reliable performer, but he was drifting, a former main eventer searching for the next defining chapter of his career. And then, in the fall of 1989, he found it. He found Doom. The concept was simple but effective. A pair of enormous masked men, dressed head to toe in black, hiding their identities, brought in as hired muscle by a glamorous and manipulative manager named Woman. They were billed simply as Doom, and they debuted on pay-per-view at Halloween Havoc in October of 1989, where they shocked the wrestling world by defeating the up-and-coming Steiner brothers in their very first major outing. Now, the masks fooled almost nobody. Reed's partner under the hood was Ron Simmons, a former All-American football player from Florida State who had brief stints in the National Football League and the Canadian Football League before turning to wrestling. He and Reed were both massive, both powerfully built, both African-American athletes who had been on WCW television not long before Doom appeared. Eagle-eyed fans figured out who was beneath the masks almost immediately. But the gimmick still worked, because the two men were genuinely intimidating and genuinely talented. The early going, however, was rough. After their hot debut, Doom hit a serious slump. They were entered into a tag team tournament at Starrcade in 1989 and finished dead last, losing every single match without scoring a point. Their manager, Woman, lost interest and departed. And on February 6, 1990, the wheels appeared to come off entirely when the Steiner brothers defeated them in a rematch, with a stipulation that forced Doom to finally remove their masks. When the hoods came off, there was Ron Simmons and Butch Reed, exactly as everyone had suspected. But far from being the end of the act, the unmasking turned out to be the beginning of their best run. Freed from the masks, free to show their faces and use their full athletic abilities, and now paired with a sharp, fast-talking new manager named Teddy Long, Doom suddenly clicked. They were no longer two anonymous monsters. They were two legitimate stars with personality, presence, and a chip on their shoulders. And in 1990, they conquered the division. At the Capital Combat event that May, Doom once again challenged the Steiner brothers, and this time, in a genuine upset, they beat the Steiners cleanly to capture the World Tag Team title. It was the crowning achievement of Butch Reed's career, and what followed was a title reign for the ages. Doom held those tag team championships for the better part of a year, an astonishing reign that lasted somewhere in the neighborhood of 280 days. To put that in perspective, it set the record for the longest single reign in the history of that championship, a record that, remarkably, stood all the way until WCW itself went out of business in 2001. No other team ever held those belts longer in a single run. Through that reign, Doom mowed through the division. They defended against the Steiners. They beat the beloved Rock and Roll Express at the Great American Bash. They brawled with the legendary Four Horsemen, including a famous and chaotic street fight against Arn Anderson and Barry Windham at Starrcade in 1990, which ended in confusion when both falls happened simultaneously. For one glorious year, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons were the most dominant tag team in all of wrestling. But all great teams eventually come apart, and Doom's ending was as explosive as their title reign was long. Cracks began to show in early 1991. At the WrestleWar pay-per-view in February of 1991, Doom faced the fabulous Freebirds and lost, the defeat coming down to a moment of miscommunication between the two partners. The frustration boiled over. After the match, with the Freebirds gone, Reed turned on Simmons, attacking his longtime partner in a vicious assault that instantly turned Simmons into a sympathetic fan favorite and brought the team of Doom to a definitive bitter end. The split set up a final confrontation between the two men. Their manager, Teddy Long, sided with Reed, the heel, and the former partners engaged in a short but intense feud over who was the better man. It culminated at Super Brawl in a steel cage match marketed with a nod to their former team name, where Ron Simmons got his revenge by pinning Butch Reed. There was even a brief, strange coda when the two reunited for a single night to wrestle in Japan at a major WCW and New Japan Super Show, only for them to start brawling with each other again afterward, confirming for good that Doom was finished. After the cage match loss, Reed left the company for a while. Simmons, freed from the partnership, would go on to make history himself, becoming the first African-American to hold a World Heavyweight Championship in a major American promotion the following year, with Teddy Long famously at his side. Reed, meanwhile, made one more run at WCW in 1992, returning to align himself with the imposing Barbarian and a young wild brawler named Cactus Jack, who the world would later come to know as Mick Foley. Reed teamed with the Barbarian to defeat Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham at a Clash of the Champions special, but the run was brief. Shortly after, Butch Reed left WCW for good. His days on national television were over. He was only in his late 30s, but the major promotion chapter of his career had closed. And it closed quietly, without fanfare, without a grand retirement ceremony, the way so many wrestling careers of that era simply faded out. Reed continued to lace up his boots on the independent circuit for years, taking bookings here and there, working smaller shows for promoters and fans who remembered what he had been. He kept at it, on and off, all the way into the early 2010s before finally hanging it up for good around 2013, more than 30 years after his debut. Away from the ring, Reed reinvented himself in a way that fit the small-town Missouri kid he had always been at heart. He became a rodeo cowboy. It was a fitting second act for a man whose entire identity had been built on raw physical toughness and a refusal to back down from anything. The bright lights of Madison Square Garden and the sold-out arenas of the Territory days gave way to something quieter and closer to home. The later years were not without their hardships, as is sadly true for so many performers from that brutal, body-destroying generation. But Reed remained a beloved figure to those who knew the business, an old-school tough guy who had earned the respect of nearly everyone he ever stepped into the ring with. In his final years, Reed reconnected with fans and a new generation of wrestlers through social media, where he remained warm, generous, and proud of his legacy. He would reach out to younger talent, share old photographs, and offer encouragement, the elder statesman delighting in the fact that he had not been forgotten. Then, in early 2021, his health collapsed with frightening speed. In January of 2021, Butch Reed suffered 2 massive heart attacks. His body, which had carried him through a football field and decades of physical punishment in the ring, could not withstand the strain. On February 5, 2021, Bruce Franklin Reed passed away in Warrensburg, Missouri, the same town where his story had begun. He was 66 years old. The official statement, shared through his family, attributed his death to heart complications following those 2 heart attacks. His family also indicated that he had tested positive for the virus that was sweeping the world at that time in mid-January, adding another painful layer of complication to his final weeks, though the precise interplay of factors in his passing has never been fully detailed publicly. The tributes poured in immediately. WWE honored him on its programming. Ric Flair and countless others paid their respects. And his family spoke about a man who, behind the dyed blonde hair and the villainous sneer, had always been a great brother, a good man, and a source of pride for the small Missouri community that had raised him. So how do we measure the career of Butch Reed? It is a genuinely complicated question, and that complication is exactly what makes him so compelling. On the one hand, there is the case for what he was. He was a multi-time territory champion. He drew real money at the top of one of the toughest, most respected promotions in the country. He main evented the first Survivor Series. He held tag team gold in WCW for a record-setting reign that outlasted the company itself. He worked with and against many of the greatest names of his era, from the Junkyard Dog to Randy Savage, to the Steiner Brothers to the Four Horsemen, and he held his own against all of them. By any reasonable standard, that is a successful, decorated, accomplished professional wrestling career. But there is also the case for what he might have been. Reed had the physique of a world champion, the athletic background of an elite competitor, and the natural charisma that cannot be taught. There was a moment in the late 1980s when he stood right on the doorstep of true superstardom. The Intercontinental title was within his grasp. A run at the very top seemed possible, and for reasons that remain disputed, that ceiling was never broken. Whether it was bad booking, bad luck, the politics of the business, the whispers about his professionalism, or some combination of all of it, Butch Reed never quite became the singular megastar that his gifts seemed to promise. And maybe that is the most honest way to remember him. Not as a failure because he was anything but, and not as a forgotten footnote because his accomplishments were real and lasting, but as one of the great almost stories of his generation. A magnificent athlete and a genuinely tough man who built a long, respected, championship-laden career while always seeming to carry the faint shadow of an even greater career that never quite arrived. The peers who shared the locker room with him knew exactly how good he was. The fans who watched him terrorize the Junkyard Dog or dominate the WCW tag division knew it too, and the record books, with that one stubborn, unbroken title reign, will always quietly insist on it. There is a legacy in that respect that runs deeper than belts and win-loss columns. In an era when the business did not always know how to push African-American performers to the very top, Reed helped pry that door open a little wider for everyone who came after him. His money-drawing war with the Junkyard Dog proved that two black stars could headline cards and sell out buildings on nothing but their own merits. His record-setting reign with Ron Simmons showed that two powerful black athletes could be the most dominant force in an entire division. And when Simmons went on to capture a World Heavyweight Championship, he did it standing on a foundation that Doom had helped lay. Reed rarely got the individual credit for any of it, and he was never the type to demand it. But the path he helped carve is still visible today, every time a young powerhouse walks through the curtain and gets judged on nothing more than how good he actually is. Drop a comment down below and let me know your favorite Butch Reed memory. Like and subscribe for more hard-hitting wrestling documentaries. Until next time.